Committee. Tonight we have the Community Development Department and, oh gosh, we got Library, Park and Recs, we have, what else we have?
Human Services.
Human Services, okay. But before we do that, you all should have received minutes for the May 22nd and the May 24th meeting. Did you all get those?
Yes. Yes.
Sir.
So could I have a motion to approve the May 21st minutes?
Move approval?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the May 21st minutes. Any changes? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Can I have a motion for the May 24th meeting?
Move approval?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the May 24th meeting. Changes? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Motion is adopted. That takes us, the two sets we have, that takes us to tonight. And I believe, Mr. Manager, is all yours, and I think we're going to start with page 113. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the first section of the budget up is community development, starting on page 113. Looking at revenues budget to budget, they are down $152,000 or 8.8%. This is mainly due to building, electrical, and mechanical and plumbing permits being down $150,000 in total. As you know, the state of New Hampshire is no longer securing building permits from the city for the building projects, and this has a significant impact on building permit revenue stream. So, and I've talked to the council about that in the past, but I just want to remind you of that. To understand the scale of that change, to give you an example, and these large projects don't come along all the time, the city collected nearly $311,000 on building permit revenue for the women's prison alone. So you can see these large spreads. Close enough? So, there we go. Okay. One thing to note, that although revenues are down, the number of building permits issued is expected to remain relatively consistent, if not slightly higher in fiscal year 19. Expenses budget to budget are up $202,000, mainly due to wages and benefit increases, and that number does include $103,000 for the code division reorganization, which I've spoken of before. Other recommended funding items in the Community Development Department are $775,000 for stormwater improvements, $200,000 for additional funding for development permitting software, $116,000 for GIS improvements to the tax map update, which is phase 6A. As you know, we're working our way through the entire city, and the replacement of a large format digital scanner. $100,000 for a zoning update, phase 2 for the creation of the form-based code. This is phase 2 of 2 phases. $60,000 for the stormwater enterprise mechanism that we've talked about in the past. $55,000 for traffic signal and traffic operation improvements on North Main in Boonton and I-93, 393, excuse me. $25,000 for bridge and dam maintenance repairs, and this is for a complete bridge assessment plan to be used to prioritize maintenance and repair. So if you notice, we've done a lot of bridge work over the last few years, and we want to keep on top of that and determine what's the next projects that need to be done. $5,600 for iPads for the planning board, and again, $103,000 for the code division reorganization. Funding for the following projects are presented in the CIP as asterisk items, and either looking for direction from City Council to proceed with securing donations or other funding sources, or simply waiting for a commitment from those funding sources. So there is $1 million in the capital improvement program, which we'll talk about on CIP night, but I just want to be aware of these. For the Merrimack River Greenway Trail, there's $700,000 for the next workings of the phase design permitting for Langley Parkway, $300,000 for the replacement of CAT buses, and $230,000 for the North Pembroke Bridge replacement. And even though that's an appropriation out of $230,000 when the time comes, there's no additional city money in there. I'd be glad to answer any questions in the public hearings next.
Who has questions for the manager? Councilor Schleck.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Espel. Code. I've been concerned over the last few years that we needed some more folks in there. So perhaps we could be a little more proactive. We could get to things maybe in a little more timely manner, and that I'm looking at maybe some updates in how they maintain their records.
Yes.
With the decrease in revenue, does it still justify having those additional people? And by having those additional, making the adjustments in the department, does that give us the opportunity to be a little more proactive in some of the issues where we've been more, we've waited more for people to bring those issues to us?
I think it's going to allow us to provide better customer service, having people with the skill sets available when people need them. When folks who have not been through specific development processes themselves, which is most people when they're doing something particularly to a residential unit, will actually have more assistance along the line. It is not geared up towards becoming a proactive, inspection-oriented code enforcement organization. That would take a lot more staff. The city used to have something like that back decades and decades ago when there's federal funding available for that. So it is still, I would say, would still be more complaint-driven oriented. But the follow-up, kind of leading into your question, the follow-up on that should be quicker, should be more available. Because in reality, as you know, really half the staff are retired who only can do so many hours per week and would like to get beyond that so that folks are available at a regular schedule to people who need them.
Yeah, thank you. Just a follow-up, if I may?
Sure.
Thank you. Follow-up on planning on the iPads.
Yes.
I think for the most part, the iPads have worked really well for us. I imagine they'll work well for planning. A couple of areas where I found a little difficulty with the iPads is side-by-side comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And then also when we get charts or maps, it's hard to, you can expand it obviously, but it's hard to take into that entire view. So I'm wondering if there's some thoughts on, particularly with planning, with all the large number of charts they get, if there's how the iPads are going to, how the planning board's going to interact with all the charts and maps that they wind up with.
Well, this is one of those cases, be careful what you ask for. This is what they're asking for.
Okay.
Because I think the tools that they're using now, which made sense, the Chromebooks and whatnot, they're just not, they don't have the ability that the iPad has for planning review. Councilor Champlin could probably answer, or Mayor Boulay could probably answer better than I could, but this is something, my understanding, excuse me, the planning board thinks would be a great tool, and being that they're volunteers, it'd be nice to be able to give them those tools. But
Thank you.
Councilor Quitter.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Manager, with regards to the CAT buses and the replacement, if I understand correctly, this is like a 3-year program where we're replacing one bus per year.
Yes.
And when the first year happened a couple of years ago, there was a delay because there was a backlog trying to find a provider for the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where we are in that process, and do we have 2 buses at this point?
there are 2 buses. This is the third of 3. And the way the funding works is there's been issues with finding the provider. There's also been issues with the funding streams that come from this federal money, which I believe is 80%, state money, which is 10%, and city money, which is 10%. So of the $300,000 for a bus, $30,000 is from the city. So even though you'd be appropriating, if you approve the budget, the $30,000 this year, you won't see the bus until probably a year from now, by the time they get manufactured and whatnot. So they're progressing along. We weren't going to go to the next bus until they showed some progress. And they've been trying. It's just there's been reasons why procuring the buses hasn't occurred. You've always had your money available whenever it's been needed. You've had your money available, in essence, for the other 2 buses for 2 years, and now they're getting ready for the third one.
So if we're looking at this budget, does it make sense as we get closer and start really kicking around the numbers in the final that this would be something that we could say there's $30,000 to hold on to if it's going to be a year before we actually see this bus?
Well, you need to be able to commit your money so that they can order the bus.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
it's good
I
thought,
appreciate
though.
that.
Councilor Champlin.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you very much. At this time, we'll open the public hearing on the Community Development Department. Anyone wish to testify? Good evening and welcome back.
Good evening, mayors and members of the City Council. I'm Roy Schweiker. I have a couple of issues with the Community Development Department. One thing is I understood that a lot of the stuff was supposed to be paid for by inspection fees and whatnot. So theoretically, we're spending more money. We should increase the fees, and that would, make it so the taxpayer doesn't have to put up the money. And one particular thing that's always bugged me is, unfortunately, a lot of stuff I'm going to say is, cross-departmental, so part of it relates to tonight and part of it relates to other nights. But as an example, I keep hearing about the general fund gets a subsidy from the parking fund because people from the city park in the city garages for free. And that is true to a certain extent, but I would also say that other funds are getting a subsidy from the parking fund, as in if people who are being paid out of community development funds park in the garage, it's really community development funds that are getting a subsidy from the parking fund and not from the general fund. So what I'd like to do is put this, on a more business-like basis, say, okay, every space we have reserved for a city vehicle should be a charge against the department that vehicle is in, and then, percolate up, whether that's general fund money or some sort of revenue department or whatever. And the same thing, if some position gets assigned a parking space, or now we're talking about not a space, but a permit. Anyway, whatever position that permit goes to, that goes into the salary and benefits package of that position. And once again, depending on whether that's charged up through the general fund or some other fund, that would work its way back through. So therefore, the parking fund would get, reimbursed from these peculiar funds that are parking in their garages, and that would help the parking fund. And at the same time, to the extent that these other funds should or are being paid for by fees, then we would raise the fees to compensate, so that that's where the money would come from, rather than the poor folks that are living in mobile homes with their 20% tax hikes. And the second thing is I'm a bit unhappy about the sort of developments that the city seems to be encouraging anymore. I think generally these housing developments that they are building or encouraging people to build probably are going to be revenue negative. Depending on the number of kids that are living in these developments, you're going to be paying more out in school tax than you're receiving total from these developments. And as to why we're trying to encourage people to build things that will increase the tax rate, I'm not quite sure. I think we need to take a look at exactly what it is we are building, and only build things that are good for the city and not things that are revenue negative for the city. And another thing is about the downtown jobs. I hear about bragging the jobs that this new development's going to bring in. Well, if the people that were in the community development department were paid the wages of those jobs, I think they wouldn't be about them. We have what used to be a law firm being replaced by a hotel. So you're getting desk clerks and chambermaids. We're getting what used to be, mid-level state bureaucrats in DES building being replaced by a restaurant. So you're getting, wait staff, cooks. So you're having a lot of what we'll say are good jobs, or at least not terrible jobs, being replaced by jobs at the low end of the spectrum. And this really isn't a good thing. I mean, you're paying in-town Concord $30 grand a year to come in and lobby that we need free parking for these downtown employees who are part-timers and can't afford the parking rates. Maybe we need to say, okay, any job that's not full-time at a reasonable pay, that it is being brought in as a negative for the project and not a positive, because, that's really not good for the city to keep increasing our expenses more than our revenues.
So in terms of the community development department budget, what would you change, or what do you like, dislike?
Well, what I would say is, if we have people in the community development department that all they're doing is bringing in revenue negative projects.
Okay, so you don't
we could save a couple $100 grand a year by eliminating those people.
Okay,
They're costing us money.
And what else?
Well, this is unfortunately our only chance to talk about policy. So what I'm saying is, as a policy.
But I just want to make sure that it's useful for your time, useful for us, and useful for the people watching to know specifically in the section of the budget we're dealing with, what do you like, what would you change, what would you dislike within the community development department?
I guess if we're going to keep the same number of people in the community development department, they need to be spending their time working on bringing in businesses that are good for the city rather than negative for the city. And one thing, once again, you heard this before, but it ties into what I'm saying is, talking about this, green environment, people are talking about the population of the world should not be increasing definitely. It should be plateauing. We shouldn't be adding that many people. We can't expect as a city that we're going to keep paying for each phase of growth, not by itself, but by some future phase that's going to come along, because at some point, I think we're going to say, no, the population of the world is not growing. The population of the city of Concord is not growing. We should not be expecting that we should put out money now that's negative because we might get future growth someday. So, this is an attitude, and I think that, the problem is that we no longer have a mechanism for people to testify other than at budget hearings. We don't have those 4 meetings a year where the city council went around and had listening sessions. So that's why I'm talking a policy issue that, except for the stuff I'm talking about with the, fees and the, garage charges and so forth, that doesn't necessarily affect the budget.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Warren?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to clarify something, Mr. Schweiker. Are you suggesting on a policy basis that our city ought not to be encouraging development for young families with children?
I'm saying that picking any particular group of people and saying we need them, I mean, would you say the city should say we need more black people or we need more Asian people? I think that's discrimination. It's probably illegal under the U.S. Constitution to discriminate on age or ethnicity or anything else. I think that we have an ample number of people with kids in this city. I don't think we need to bring in more. On the other hand, we need to find the ones that are here. If you think we need more people to make the city work, then this is exactly the attitude I'm complaining about. Is we cannot, have a Ponzi scheme of living off the next level of growth. At some point, we've got to say, okay, the world has enough people. We're not going to pay for the city by growing more people.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'll just share one thing with you. You may feel this is your only time to share your thoughts, but I want you to know that this is not. You have 15 people at this table, plus an administration who is more than willing to take your ideas and listen to you at any time you wish. We are all accessible. All our information is on the website. You can reach out to any one of us at any time. And as you know, I'd be more than willing to chat with you, and I'm sure all of my colleagues feel the exact same way. So I hope you the takeaway is that tonight is not the only night to share your opinions. In fact, you've stopped me many times to share your thoughts on various projects, and I've listened to you about those. So I'm sure we'll have many chats in the future, and I'll look forward to it. Thank you. Okay, you all set? Who else would like to talk about the Community Development Department? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll move on to our Leisure Services. I assume we're going to start with Library, page 118.
So on the library, page 118, revenues budget to budget are flat. Let me get to that page. Expenses budget to budget are up $99,000, mainly due to wages and benefits, which includes staffing requests for the library effort. I'm sorry, we're on library. Library effort and wages and benefits include staffing requests for the new community center, which would be open 15 hours per week. $42,000 for 3 part-time library technicians is what that translates into. Other items that are included in the budget for the library are $100,000 to replace tiles and flooring, painting, doors, windows, and hardware upgrades, and $10,000 to replace a microfilm reader printer. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, pretty straightforward. There's questions about the library. Councilor Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Manager, I see an expense for insurance on here. I haven't noticed seeing insurance expenses. Maybe I've missed it in the past on most of the departments. I guess my question is, does the city have a blanket policy through Primex? Are we self-insured? Why is this sticking out so much Is it because we have so many people coming into the building, we have a different policy?
Sure. We could.
Insurances are included in each one of the departments. I think if you scroll back to the last department we just reviewed, it was the second line up from the bottom of the expenses.
Okay.
The city does have their insurance with Primex, so we are not self-insured, and we have, obviously insurances for property liability, casualty, motor vehicles, and workers' compensation.
Do we have cyber insurance?
Cyber insurance is included in our overall liability insurance.
Okay. Well, so what makes, how do you split it up? Like, what makes this higher than community development, for instance?
The insurances, the way that we split the insurances up is based on the wages of employees, so that's the proration that we use.
Oh, so this would include, this isn't just liability, workers' comp, everything?
Well, workers' comp is included in the overall benefits piece, but the way that we actually do the distribution is based on the wages of employees.
So if somebody trips and falls in the library, are you saying the rate is calculated based on how many people work in the building?
It's not just the rate, that's just how our distribution,
That's how we
it's
allocate.
how we allocate it to each one of the departments. So if a patron falls in the library and they sue us, then that's our liability insurance that would take care of that. And we have to come up with some mechanism to distribute how do we allocate the expenses across all of our departments. And that's done based on the overall wage structure of our employees.
All right, I think I'll have to submit a yellow sheet at
Okay.
some point. I don't see the connection between how many people work in a department to what our liability is
There is
in
none,
the
right?
future. I don't see.
There is,
connection with that.
it's just,
It's not really a great connection, it's just what other,
Also includes property insurance in addition to general liability, and it's
Right.
based on building value.
for the property insurance part of it, right?
All right, I'll delve into it in the future.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Schlag?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Spell. I recently talked to our librarian, Mr. Fabian, and we discussed security at the library and mentioned that he's hoping maybe to get a couple of more security cameras in, but wasn't sure whether the current system would be able to handle that. So is that something that's going to be looked at as we upgrade the security system with the police department so that there's a tie-in, or how is that part of the police department budget? Is that part of, so?
Well, we've looked at it in general. So, for example, when we built a new community center, we made sure that the library piece, the recreational piece work together, that it works with the police department. The same thing with the security issues we're getting, the parking garages, so they will all work together. It's just now a matter of scaling that out to each one of the individual sites. And you can only have so much money to go around for so long. But the library is one of the top priorities.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions about library? Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Kenson.
Just a comment. I've received a lot of very positive feedback about the library and how it's run. And in particular, people are really drawn to the book sales.
Yes.
And that's bringing in a fair amount of revenue. I bought 3 today, and people really like it.
So just to give you an example, that was a move that the city council made several years ago, that we've always had book sales, but you allowed the revenues generated from the book sales to stay with the library and to be spent with the library. And that generated, in essence, a lot more, I think, donations, and therefore they're processed out in a reasonably good manner. So more revenue comes in, and the money just stays and is able to be add to the collection. So your entrepreneurial trust in the library staff to be able to do that generates more revenue for the library, which then doesn't have to be raised by taxes. Those are very good insight.
Thank you. Okay. So, we'll open the public hearing on the library. Anyone wishes to testify in the library? Budget. Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And that takes us to our recreation department. Should be starting on page 121.
So on page 121, Budget to budget, total revenues are up to $536,000, of which $136,000 is from operating revenues and $400,000 is from a transfer from the recreation reserve. The operating revenue includes $91,000 in new program fees and $47,000 in building rentals. Expenses, budget to budget, are up $376,000 and includes $213,000 of new staffing and upgrades of positions. It also includes $123,000 in service supplies and utilities. The remaining increase is due to regular wages and benefit increases. The new community center is slated to open in June, and funding, which is start the next couple of weeks actually, and the funding for the remaining fiscal year 2018 new expenses was approved by the City Council earlier this year, so you'll have enough dollars to operate it for this rest of this fiscal year. As I mentioned in my presentation last Monday, there are many other initiatives going on with the Recreation Department this year and supported in this budget. So I'll just go through those rather quickly. $30,000 for White Park to replace basketball and hockey lights with energy-efficient LED lighting. $60,000 for Keach Park to install a 2,000 linear foot paved pathway to connect a new community center to the parking area adjacent to the playground. $60,000 for Rolfe Park to renovate the basketball courts and install new acrylic backboards and fencing. $70,000 for Rollins Park for Phase 2 of the stone wall repair along Broadway. $85,000 in citywide recreation facility improvements, also including $45,000 to repair granite stairs, repair concrete foundation, and repoint the exterior masonry at the West Street Wardhouse. $20,000 for pre-action fire suppression system at the Green Street Community Center. $20,000 for the city Audi electrical improvements. $20,000 for Pocket Park, so that's the crack seal and stripe 3 basketball courts at West Street, Fletcher Murphy and Thompson Street play lots. $50,000 for Memorial Field for $30,000 update, of which there's 2 pieces, $30,000 update of structural engineering assessment of the football stadium and dome diamond bleachers, and $20,000 to crack seal and stripe the old tennis courts, the other 5 that weren't completely rebuilt. $40,000 for parks and cemeteries, equipment to replace 2 60-inch out-front mowers for cemeteries. $105,000 for cemetery improvements, which includes $60,000 to pave select roads at Blossom Hill. That's Phase 2 of 6 phases. $45,000 for Blossom Hill Chapel repairs. $6,000 for the installation of additional trees in parks throughout the city. $3,200 for the installation of fence guards for a portion of fencing at Memorial Field. Getting right down to it, $500 for porta potties for the July 4th celebration, and $6,900 to mow Langley Parkway on a weekly basis. Glad to answer any questions.
Those questions. Ms. Kredivic.
Thank you, Your Honor. About a month ago, we saw that the Parks and Recreation Department was potentially facing short staff for the summer. How are we doing on our hiring?
I'll have to ask Mr. Gill or Ms. Bryant to come forward.
Mr. Gill, how are we
Good
doing?
evening. I'm wonderful. Good.
You know Laura?
And Laura Bryan.
Hi.
The question was regarding the lifeguards for the pools.
Yes.
Good news and bad news is we have enough staff selected. The unfortunate news is a lot of them cannot get into lifeguarding classes until after the first week are open. So we are working diligently with Swim New Hampshire and staff to try to get everybody certified. But today, first week at the pools, we probably would not have all 4 open, but we're still fine tuning.
We won't have all 7 open.
All 7. Did I say 4? Yeah.
We'll definitely have 4.
Yeah. So we're still working very hard.
And the rest of the summer parks, the staff is in good shape, or for the summer programs?
Yep, summer camp, staff's all set, park maintenance is all set. We still are looking for one person at the cemeteries for one of the seasonal temps that didn't work out, but I think we'll be good by the end of next week.
Thanks. it's a good opportunity to bring it up, that if people are looking for a summer job, there's opportunities at the city.
There's a few left.
Okay.
Yes, so.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Councilor Schlag?
Thank you, Your Honor. So a question on the new community center, operation and maintenance costs versus projected revenue. Do we have numbers for that?
Went over the, let me see.
Yes, we do.
We do, and I provided them before, but I don't have them right in front of me. Brian, could you?
In total, it's approximately $360,000 for expenses and approximately $170,000 in anticipated revenues.
Thank you. And if I could follow up? Thank you, Your Honor. The bleacher report for Memorial Field, for the Dome Field and the main football field. When you're looking at that, are you looking at reducing the total number of bleachers, or taking some of the bleachers from Domes Field and maybe moving them over to the football field, or are we just looking at replacing what we have? So,
Do you want to go?
No, you're all set.
So we're going to take a completely fresh look at it and determine what do we need for bleachers, and if there's going to be potentially any other participants who might want to help fund additional bleachers. Because I think that you don't need all those bleachers at the same time, and it might be advisable to have permanent ones, a certain amount of permanent ones at each location, but something that might be movable, depending on what the demand is. No sense spending all that money if they're going to have bleachers sitting empty for large periods of time.
if I just, thank you, Your Honor. The bleachers in front of Dome Field, we know have heaved, have pushed up. That's obviously, or it certainly appears to be, a water moisture management problem. So is that something that's also, I know when the press box was redone, there was a lot of work done to address some of the drainage issues. So I don't know, since that work has occurred, do we still continue to have some of those moisture issues, that heaving, or is that pretty much settled?
Memorial Field is, I think, built on 2 inches above water table, so there's always going to be some heaving. I think it has been reduced since the press box area was done. We put some new general services coordinated the work and put some sump pumps in and some under drainage in, so I think it's definitely helping. But at Memorial Field, it remains a very wet, moist field, and the water table is just right there. So that's something we'll have to look at going forward with the plan. What's the best practice for going forward?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to make sure, I know that there are people in the public that are interested in coming and speaking specifically to the bleachers at Memorial Field, but as part of the discussion on the CIP projects for next week. And I want to make sure that I have it correct, that we're not temporarily voting to approve the bleachers this evening, that those people will have an opportunity to give their testimony next week.
Correct. I believe it's June 7th at 5:30 is a CIP night, and the capital improvement plan, Memorial Field, is one of those projects that you'll look at, and they'll be able to come in and have some feedback on.
Great. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry, I said I'd save this for later, but now I can't resist because I see the insurance line on here, and it's still less than the libraries. And I just going to ask Deputy City Manager LeBron if he could just take a look at the library's insurance number for a later date, just to make sure that seems to be a proper assessment, because Parks and Rec now with a new building will have, in my count, more buildings than the library has, and more attractive nuisances with pools and playgrounds and fences, and prior losses that have been paid out. So I can't see how the library could be paying more, but if an explanation could be provided, great, or if a revised number is provided and the cost is shifted differently, that's fine too.
Take a look at it.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Manager, you said that you're going to be looking for potential partnerships for people who want to participate in bleachers and Memorial Field and other such things, needs down there. I'm assuming you're talking about the school district?
That's correct.
How many other, percentage-wise, how often does the school use it versus other groups? Is it about 80-20?
It's in that 70 to 80%, 20 to 30% community. School uses it a lot in the spring and the fall. And after 6 o'clock, the community uses it for the most part, spring and the fall. But I can get you a concrete percentage, but it's in that range.
Council Diane?
Mr. Gillen, you said that the community uses the bleachers after 6. I kind of think of it more as the community uses the field after 6 for...
Oh, the complex. Yeah, I
Complex.
apologize if it was, I said the
think it
bleachers.
actually-
It was the complex in general.
bleachers.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Councilor Hursley?
Just a quick follow-up, if I may, to the mayor's comment on the percentage of use that the high school, the school district uses. A number of years ago, we had that, it was, the number that we received was 80-20, 80% the school district, 20% for the community. Came out to about $120, $130 a year out of a $160,000 budget for, and again, this is going back a number of years. The school district had recently hired a new athletic director, and I asked him how his athletic budget compared to other schools of similar sizes, and he stated they were about $80,000 less, their budget, than other schools of comparable size. I suggested to him that he was about $50,000 ahead of the game.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time we'll open the public hearing on the Parks and Recreation budget, including grounds and such. Anybody would like to testify? Come on up. Good evening and welcome.
Just lighting for the heights.
If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves?
Yeah. Hi, good evening, City Council members. My name is Aid Almeida. I work for the American Friends Service Committee as the grassroots organizer intern and also as the youth coordinator for New American African. First of all, we won't take much of your time today. We are here today mostly to express our gratitude, sincere gratitude for the support and the amount of consideration the City Council has given us since last year. And also we are very thankful for the improvement that the City Council has done for Kitch Park to make a better place for us. Some of these improvements include the new basketball hoops, and the tennis courts and the basketball court were resurfaced. I just want to say this improvement made the park very beautiful and more attractive for the young adults to use every time. Also, I'm especially grateful for the soccer goals. Personally, I love soccer. That's my first sport. And it's amazing to see the happiness among the people who play soccer using the net, especially those of us who, when we show up and we don't have like the smaller nets to use, and for the fact that the park has agreed to have the the soccer goals stay for the whole summer, we are able to use it. And a lot of the kids, they play the whole summer using the soccer goals. They do practice, they play a little tournament, and at the end of the day, we are all happy using it. So again, we are here mostly to thank the City Council for their consideration. Also, I would like to thank Councillor Candice and Madsen, and also David Gill and Laura for their support, for the large amount of support they've given us since last year and their encouragement. Without them, we won't be here today. So thank you. Now I'll pass down to...
Hi, good evening. My name is Rosal Arivalo, and I'm a student at NHTI and a group leader at Bow Youth Center. And I'm here today along with my fellow Change for Concord members to personally thank you for listening to us from the last time and for improving Keach Park. Most importantly, I am thankful for how well the tennis court has been resurfaced. Now that there's a new net and better ground to play on, I'm able to play more with friends who enjoy playing tennis as a way to exercise and interact in a positive way. It was very difficult to use the courts last year because of the cracks and broken nets, and now that the tennis court is improved, I see more people playing often, including myself. And lastly, I want to thank David Gale and Laura for their wonderful support.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Samrawit Silva, and I would like to start off by thanking you all for being here today and for your time. I'm an undergrad student at the University of New Hampshire as an accounting major. I currently reside in Bow, but I spend most of my free time here, and I've been working at a law firm in Concord for over 3 years, so I spend a lot of my time there, specifically at Keach Park. As a member for Change for Concord, I would like to thank you all for your support and all that you have done thus far. I especially want to thank you all for the improvements on the basketball court and the new hoops. My younger brother likes to shoot around there more often than I do, but it brings me tremendous joy to see all ages enjoying the new and improved basketball courts. I just want to say that your efforts are noticed and greatly appreciated. And as we continue to help improve the Height community, we ask you to keep us in mind as we continue to push for the lights at Keach Park, as it further help make the park an even more welcoming, safe, and inclusive environment. And thank you again for your support and for your time today.
Thank you. Any questions for anyone of the folks? Really appreciate your time coming out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, if I could ask you one favor.
Yes.
So the young lady back here, she really wants to be able to spell your name right in the minutes. If you wouldn't mind just jotting down your name for spelling so we can put it in the minutes correctly. Is that all right?
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify in Park and Recreation? Okay, with that, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Manager, do you want to, we'll take votes at the end if that's all right. That's fine. Mr. Manager, you want to go through Human Services, please? Yes. On page 125.
Revenues, budget to budget, are down $5,000, and this is because of direct assistance is down, as we do not anticipate as much reimbursement from clients, which happens when the economy improves. Budget to budget expenses are down $77,000, or 9.8%. This is due to a decrease in direct assistance budget. As you can see, for fiscal year 18, we're anticipating this expense to come in at $214,000. No other changes in the human services budget are projected, and I'll briefly go over the general fund pro forma after the public hearing.
Okay. Any questions about Human Services? Seeing none, thank you very much. This time we'll open the public hearing on Human Services. Anyone wish to testify?
Hello again, everybody. This is another example of, the kind of cross-departmental things. I know that the fire chief hasn't had a chance to come in with his report on the ambulance expenses, but I did read in the paper that something like half of all the ambulance billing isn't collected, which seemed like a lot to me. And some of it was referred to collection agencies. And, it just seemed like a very high percentage. Most people have some form of insurance now, and those that don't could probably get it. So I was wondering what would happen if we suggested that the fire department, before they refer any of these people to collection agencies, they refer them to the Human Services Department. Maybe these people don't know about expanded Medicare. I mean, I find it shocking the number of people who've never heard of that, but then people don't know you can't park on the streets in the winter, and people don't know you can collect leaves, so they don't know about expanded Medicaid either, I guess. But anyway, expanded Medicaid, as far as I can tell, is one of the very best medical programs in terms of they will actually pay retroactively for expenses. You can sign up and it'll pay for stuff you've already spent. I don't know of any other health care plan that'll do that. So if we could bring people in and Human Services could talk to them, they discover they're eligible for expanded Medicaid, then maybe we get reimbursed for our ambulance runs, whereas many of these people probably are never going to have the money to pay it in cash. And that is to say it can't go to collection agencies eventually for the real deadbeats, but it would seem like we'd be helping the people because then they'd maybe get some of their other expenses covered or be willing to go to the doctor before they need an ambulance or whatever. So, like I say, involves more than one department, but Human Services is one of them. And the second one, once again, is something that may involve more than one thing, and that is, I think if you took the typical resident in Concord and somebody came up on the street and said, would you give us give me $20 so I could buy heroin? They'd be shocked and say, no, of course not. And if someone came up and said, would you give me $20 to buy a room so I can spend my own money on heroin? They probably would still say no. And I feel it's inappropriate for the city to give a block grant to a homeless shelter so people can stay there for free when many of these people, in fact, have money and could afford to pay their own expenses, but they're happy to stay for free so that they can spend their own money on drugs. So I'm suggesting that we should once again have the, Human Services Department deal with the shelter. People come in, they spend the night, and then the next day they're told, look, you need to go to the Human Services Department and, get a chit from them. And if you can't afford to stay here, you get a chit from Human Services, and they'll pay for your stay. But if you can afford it, then you'll go on their list of money to be collected. Because, we're talking about you want to attract, young people with families. I think what you're currently trying to do is attract drug abusers who, get free housing if they come to Concord, which isn't available elsewhere. And I think having a city full of people like that is probably the worst thing if you're trying to attract people with families. People with families don't like the idea that city buildings and streets are full of drug abusers. So I really think we need to end the, freeloaders going to the shelter. People don't get food stamps just by walking in. They've got to prove they're indigent. They don't get medical care unless they prove they can't afford it. I don't see why we're doing this for the shelter either. I think we need to have a system whereby the people can afford pay, and maybe that'd be fewer freeloaders and drug abusers in this city, which would be all to the good. Right now, you're paying a paid employee there to essentially act as a prison guard. So you have a person that's responsible and could collect money from the people that have it. And I just think this is one way to improve the city, and it is a fiscal thing relating to the Human Services Department. I think you should put the $30,000 in their budget and let them dole it out only the ones that need it. Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none. Okay, anyone else wishing to testify? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Manager, you have one item further you want to talk to us about, the pro forma?
Yes, sir. The general fund pro forma was handed out earlier this evening. You can also see it on page 624 for those folks interested at home. A few things I'd like to point out about the form at this time. While the FY estimate column, as you can see on there, projects at 1.7 million more in revenues than expenditures, that is before any end-of-year tax adjustment or overlay adjustments are made, and I'll keep you apprised of that as we conclude the fiscal year, so over the next month plus. Fiscal year 19 budget is the full summary of all the information that we reviewed last Thursday, May 24th, and tonight. The tax rate at the bottom of the increase is, as we've talked about in the past, looking beyond to 2020 and beyond, you can see we'll have some additional work to do in future years. So there's additional increases in debt service, paving program, wages and benefits, capital transfers. And so we have, as every year, we have work to do. Look forward to the future years. Glad to answer any questions.
Anybody have a question on the performer? Okay. We may, after we get some time to look at it, and so. Okay. Do you have anything else you want to present this evening?
No, sir.
Okay. So with that, let's go back to the Community Development Department. Do we have a motion to tentatively approve the Community Development budget?
So moved.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve this Community Development Department. Any comments? Seeing none, ready for the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The 10th Community Development Department budget is tentatively approved. Takes us to Leisure Services. We'll start with Library. Is there a motion to?
So moved. Second.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the library budget. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion on the Parks and Recreation budget.
So moved.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the Parks and Recreation budget. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. And last but not least, the Human Services budget.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to tentatively approve the Human Services budget. Is there any questions? Council Cohen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know if it's, I should have asked this earlier, but through the discussion and hearings can you give us an idea of what's changed, if anything, in the last, since 2008, as far as the type of clients that we're receiving? Has it shifted as needs and wants over the last 10 years, especially since we got out of the major recession? Are the services that we're providing now, are they the same as before, certain areas up or certain areas down?
I think that might best be answered by Karen, and I think she could give you.
That's a good move on your part.
I could explain it to you, but then she'd correct me. So ask Karen to come forward. I think she has a good perspective because she's been in Nashua Nashua for the first several years, and now Concord, so she can give you a good perspective of what's impacting New Hampshire. So.
Good evening. I've consulted with other departments, also with city welfare. When we're looking at Manchester, Portsmouth, it's across the state that we've seen a decrease in individuals coming in for assistance. Right now, we think it's really the economy that's changed and improved, and multi-generations are just living together because they just can't afford it. When you're looking at Concord, and it's like a 1% vacancy rate, and the cost of an apartment is about $11.50, it's really difficult for them to be able to maintain that. I've been in Concord now for about a year and a half, and even when I was in Nashua, we were seeing the trend that there was a decrease in individuals coming in for assistance. The systems have not changed. I think it's just people looking for their own resources and fixing their problems and really looking at to see what supports they have in order for them to be able to maintain their daily living. And I think that that's what the change is. There's nothing has been very specific or unique to Concord. It's just across the state that that's occurring.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Another question, just a statement, if I may, Your Honor. The statement was made earlier about the homeless shelter, the temporary winter shelter attracting people to Concord. A number of years ago, that was a concern. I believe the city worked with the folks at the homeless shelter and the Coalition to End Homelessness. They came up with some protocols. And what we saw was that we were still able to address those in the community, but the shift changed. Before we had that discussion, we saw about 2/3 of the people that were staying at the winter shelter from outside of the community. After this discussion, it wasn't that we were turning people away that were coming to Concord, but what we saw was that we were now sheltering about 2/3 of the people have a connection to Concord, and that was because of the way the shelter operated and advertised their services and made those services. They weren't, again, no one was being turned away if they came to the community, but I think what was made clear to other communities is that Concord was no longer going to be the dumping ground for the rest of the state, and that these other communities also had an obligation to take care of those folks who had a connection to their communities.
Councilor Slegg, just to help you along the way there. So here's what happened. The previous shelters that we had, they took money from the state through 211.
Yep.
When you do that, you take state dollars, you're obligated to then serve the state. When we went to St. Peter's, and Father Rich and the United Way and Concord Hospital and everyone else pitched in, obviously the Friends program in this last year being the coalition, we no longer accepted state dollars, and we did not participate in 201. So it wasn't the way it was advertised. It was simply not accepting state dollars. We focused on concentrating on our own folks, and that's why we didn't see people over the past 3 years showing up from Peterborough and Keene like we had in the past and elsewhere. So. Karen, it is great to see you.
Thank you. Same here.
Anything you want to share with us?
No.
I don't get to see you very often. You're not here at City Hall. You hide down there.
I've been
I don't
coaching
think she
her.
loves us. Karen,
Yeah.
do you need anything? Can we help you? What can we do?
No, I think things are going great. No, things are going well. I think that when we're looking at the economy, affordable housing is really my push. And I think that we all know it. I'm preaching to the choir in reference to that. But in reference to the office, I think that things are going great. I really have no complaints. And I really do love Concord. I'm glad that opportunity that I was given about a year and a half ago to be able to do the work that I've been doing in Nashua. And that's it. I really don't have my list. Maybe I'll share it with you afterwards, but I don't have anything that can come to my mind.
She's fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She got a heck of a deal on her insurance from Brian LeBrun.
That's right. We don't know who, somebody.
Councilor Keach. Thank you. Karen, just
Yes,
a quick
sir.
question.
Yes.
How much collaboration and cooperation do you get from some of the smaller communities around Concord? I mean, do you folks work together, or is it a lot of it fall on your shoulders?
Well, I think that what we try to do, if I go back to some of the smaller communities don't have a shelter, so they do make referrals to the shelters in Concord. They do have to accept a person if they come in at their doorsteps. But we do try to work with them. I get a lot of consultations from smaller towns that work very differently than bigger towns. Sometimes I don't understand how they actually work, so I'm still learning about the smaller communities. But in reality, they come here, and we try to have a good working relationship with the smaller towns and trying to see, well, how can we work together? And really placing the responsibility where it belongs. I have no problem calling back a town and saying, okay, we have an individual that was just there. What can we do? But we make sure that we are fulfilling our obligation first. Just because they're from another town, we're not going to send them away. We're really going to have to meet our obligation, and then we can deal with one-on-one on the towns. But that's what we have to fulfill,
Great.
most
Thank you.
importantly.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to add that Karen and I sit together on the city's steering committee on the plan to end homelessness, and Karen is a great partner and a great collaborator with all the other agencies and nonprofits that are represented around the table, working on a long-range solution to the issues of homelessness in the city.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No one else? Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Okay, so I don't really remember where we are. I think we have a motion.
Yeah.
We ready for the vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the ayes have it. Human Services budget is tentatively approved. You reviewed the pro forma. I have no further business. You?
Oh, you just have a meeting coming up on Monday. That's it.
And Mondays, we're going to be reviewing the special revenue funds as well as the enterprise funds, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Nope. We're
Okay.
going to, we have, do we properly scheduled it, notified, right?
You advertise. I'm not in it, but yes.
No, but
Yes,
we
you
actually
did.
did it right, though.
Yes, you did it right.
So you need a motion to go into non-public
So we
session?
need a motion to go into non-public session with RSA 91A to discuss manager's evaluation.
So moved.
Motion made, second to do that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Is that, excuse me, so we have to do roll call votes, so that's why I ask you if it's unanimous, and that's why I look around the table to make sure it is unanimous. So the minutes, that is a 15-0 vote, right? Okay.
Yes.
That's adopted. Thank you much.
Thank you.